Let me first of all say welcome to everybody. My name is Matthew Gabriel. I'm a professor and chair of the Department of Religion and Culture. It's my great pleasure to be the host of this event this evening. And it's also my great pleasure to host and to introduce Shannon Trosper Schorey, who is one of the department's affiliated research faculty. This is a new program that the department started just this spring, in which we offer affiliation to the department and access to library resources and mentoring and other types of things. And all we ask in return is a lovely presentation such as the one that we're about to hear. And the one we're about to hear is entitled Meatbag, Notes on Technology, Enchantment, and Disability. Dr. Schorey took her PhD from the University of North Carolina in Religious Studies in 2018. She's currently an independent scholar and works for a company by the name of Red Hat. But rather than being effusive, I will turn it over to her and we'll just get going. So over to you, Dr. Schorey.
Thank you so much. And before we get started, I do want to just take a minute and also thank Dr. Matthew Gabriel for your easy communication and support, Dr. Colby Edmondson for the poster, Dr. Shaylee Patel for her mentorship over the spring term. I'm sincerely hard-pressed to think of a kinder, sharper, or more generous conversation partner. I will always intellectually play with you. And I'd like to thank the department for this opportunity and take a moment to say that, because it's no secret that the humanities in general is under pressure and the academic job market in particular is in crisis. Half of academic Twitter, or at least what's left of it, is dedicated to that conversation 24/7. It is, however, a lot harder to find folks offering acts of research alliance and support, especially for those outside of their departments and institutions. So to be able to rampage your library and have the affiliation with and support of a department like yours for a semester was a true gift. Thank you. Meatbag is a project very much in its early stages. What I'll be offering today is just a set of notes, first impressions really about what I'm seeing and starting to think about at the intersection of enchantment, technology, and disability within corporate tech culture in the United States. This project stems out of my interest in how information has become such a vague and bloated concept that it verges on metaphysics. I have no idea half the time what people mean when they say it. It's both content and form, raw communication and biology, spreadsheets and the cosmos, math and a hardened product of capital. Information is supposedly able to, and admittedly often does, enlighten, evolve, infect, confuse, program, police, and murder us. It's this flexibility in the popular use of the term that has caused division amongst technology and internet activists who have long assembled behind the slogan, information wants to be free. It's a shorthand for the fact that technology seems to get cheaper and better at the same time. That access to information is powerful and should be easier to provide with each technological advancement. It's at the origin story of open source software, a method of software production that emphasizes transparency and access as both philosophically good and materially good in the product development pipeline. It's wielded as critique against the corporate control over global technological progress in the name of proprietary software, against censorship, and in the wildly abusive contemporary landscape of copyright law. But it's pretty weird, right? Information wants to be free. Several scholars have already explored how versions of this idea developed in the American counterculture and how technological and hippie values were infused together in the mid-20th century. But I've been curious about the permutations of this idea since then. I found hackers in Sweden who took a religious studies class, learned about how difficult categories are to defend, mashed it with the slogan of idea and created a religion, thinking that, well, obviously religious rights legislation would win out against copyright and protect their sacred ritual of digital piracy. This is one of their ministers at their first pirate wedding, note the motherboard and anonymous mask. And side note, I know a couple of these folks, they are very charming, but I have yet to come across a more compelling story about why it's good to major in religious studies rather than stop at the one class, had they only known how impossible this was going to be for them. I kept following this thread of information wants. I learned more about hackers and open source. I even ended up working in tech, wondering how in the world such an idea could have legs in the land of ROI and business. And as I kept researching, I kept being bothered by the fact that there were no people here. I mean, there was and there wasn't. I found a legacy of American countercultural thinking deeply stamped into this activist discourse, an activist legacy that, for all it appealed to me, as I've also seen Hackers 1995 and Fallen in Love, was still an activism that was deeply white, male, libertarian, American, and elitist. And I kept wondering if there was something about this formulation of information, this idea that information wants, that continues to lend itself to those demographics. What kind of work is this doing? Who is it hiding? Where are the meatbags? But let's back up a second, because even though I'm terminally online, doesn't mean you are. What's a meatbag? In the animated sitcom Futurama, there's an alcoholic robot who uses the term as one both of endearment and disgust for his human colleagues who have dull, organic bodies rather than shiny metal ones. The Star Wars franchise picked the term up after Bender, and now it's out in the wilds of social media as a way to refer to the thing that ties us most clearly to decay: getting tired, going to the bathroom, dealing with age, illness. I like the term because of how it serves as a shorthand for one of the latest trends in Western nonsense, that our bodies, our meat, is simply a platform for our minds, a platform that can be augmented, replaced, abstracted, left behind. The idea that we are our minds is an ongoing gift from Rene Descartes, a man who turned 40 400 years ago, had a midlife crisis about it, but instead of buying a new horse or quill, decided people were too stupid to understand that Don Quixote was fiction, and also that everything he could hear, smell, see, touch, and feel were probably lies orchestrated by a very bored but very determined demon, leaving us with a fiery conclusion: I think, therefore I am. Fast forward, add late capitalism in Silicon Valley, you've got an American tech scene deeply informed by a Cartesian worldview, messing around with technological innovation, believing that whatever we are, soul, mind, consciousness, we are something fundamentally abstracted from the body. We are not our meat. Combine this again with conceptual pressures placed on information to be something ethereal, invisible, abstracted, but moving with force and impact across the world all the same. And as Catherine Hales has argued, we've got the 21st century revival of Descartes, only now consciousness is information. But that's all still sort of abstract. So let me show you what I mean by introducing you to one version of this in corporate America, the Venezuelan American futurist Jason Silva. His video series, Shots of Awe, has just over 56.5 million combined views. He's been invited to speak at Google, Microsoft, Economist, TED Global, the Singularity Summit, something called the Festival of Dangerous Ideas, which is described as Australia's disruptive festival for, God forbid, culture creators. And while I don't want to make an overblown argument that Silva himself is particularly important or even influential, I do think he's representative and particularly blunt about a formulation of information wants that is pervasive across tech. A formulation that tells us who we are supposed to be, what we are supposed to do, and how we are supposed to do them. And as we look at each piece of this story today and ask, where are the meat bags? My initial responses will be formed in part by the futurist and disability poet activist Leah Lakshmi Piepsna Simrinsa, as well as one of her interlocutors in Black disability justice, the scholar Dr. Shannon Trosper, with full recognition that their works are not for or about me, but as a grateful guests in their living rooms, changed by their insights as futurists, but futurists who reject Cartesian dualism and underline the violence that has historically attended the concept. You see, as Dr. Schock has argued, not only has this kind of dualism been used to render most bodies invisible or inconsequential, it's also used to dehumanize by way of hyperfixation on materiality. To get this aspect of it, you only need to think about the pernicious, ongoing white supremacist discourse that people of color and women are controlled by and therefore stunted by their bodies. I believe that what disability justice asks us to do, at least in part, is to pay attention to this dual movement of under-theorizing and somehow also hyper-fixating on materialism. It gives me at least a way to think about the specific contexts that have been so forcefully been attempted to be erased from these conversations. In other words, gives me a way to ask, where are the meat bags? So let's get started. Silva describes himself as a futurist who is part Timothy Leary. Leary was an American psychologist most famous for his role in the psychedelic movement of the 1960s, during which he advocated for the use of psychedelics to expand the mind, therefore also somehow change the world. Look, it's big libertarian white guy energy. Leary spent the 70s through the 90s arguing that information technology did everything psychedelics could do, but better. Leary, and through him Silva, was influenced by Marshall McLuhan, the media theorist most famously known for his idea that the medium is the message, that form not only could be, but usually was more important than content, and that different forms of media help mold different kinds of subjects. Think about what kinds of worlds we build and who we are with the printing press versus what we do and who we are with the smartphone. McLuhan described technologies as extensions of the human body, arguing that we are so entwined with materiality that we both produce and in our turn produced by our objects. McLuhan gets a lot more complicated than that. Here's what got across for Silva. Our technology has become part of our skin. We must get over our skin bag bias. Our smartphones are extensions of our cognition. They're examples of distributed intelligence. I phone, therefore I am. Don't you hate teaching sometimes? Okay, let's say I bite, which I don't, but for fun or whatever, let's play along. What does this pretty unfortunate reading of McLuhan have to do with enchantment? Well, for Leary, this sort of mind expansion culminated in two things: cyberpunks in Siberia. Cyberpunks being the individual minds who meet in the virtual world of Siberia, free from race, gender, class, or any other bodily marker of identity, united in a world of true and free communication. But for Silva, this libertarian dream becomes straight up godhood, which truly is probably not that much of an intellectual leap. Here's how he describes it. We are ontological engineers, able to create conditions, to create spaces for all of us to become ecstatic technicians of the sacred. The passport for the numinous lies within, and again elsewhere. We script information into our designs, and those designs in turn script our subjective experience. We engineer, literally, our own divinity. God mode, the title in the first video, refers to the thing you can do in video games when you are truly exhausted and cannot handle being owned by preteen dweebs any longer. So you turn all the logistics you can in the game to their easiest setting. So you cannot fail. You have all the ability in the world, this little virtual world, to do whatever you want. For Silva, this God mode is enabled more generally, like Leary, by virtual spaces. But now, importantly, they are explicitly owned by places like Meta. Technology is just the human mind turned inside out, Silva says. Let us speak of a parallel universe that is summoning its own literalization, because that is what the metaverse is. And here's where Piepsna Semrinsa and Dr. Schock have been most instructive for me, because it's clear that Silva both overinvests and under-theorizes McLuhan's medium as the message. Rather than a call to attend to form and how it shapes meaning, in this case to the body, or even actually like the actual material of the technology, Silva almost inverts the point of the whole thing. In Silva's hands, we are minds, and minds are extended out to information technologies. And so that basically means we are information technologies, but somehow, as distributed as we are, we can still sort of stay congealed in our individual forms. Only now it's better because freed from context means we are a true meeting of the minds, equally encountered, with none of the baggage, so that assumes only attaches to our body, disability, class, race, gender, etc. And this is that double moment, that double move that I mentioned earlier about Cartesian dualism, how it both erases context while hyper-investing in some forms of materialism. In this case, the everything that makes up who we are is collapsed into a normative mind defined only through what it is not. Another way to say this: It's unquestioned that in the good utopian future, disabled people don't exist. In the happy future, we're all dead. Silva's erasure of difference in the name of some vaguely described I that becomes we, my mind, our minds distributed as information is a homogenizing one. It's a colonizing one. And amongst all the other myriad kinds of violence colonization does, it also removes context. Black disability justice activist T.L. Lewis says it like this: what white supremacy does is remove the context for why things are happening, why people are behaving in particular ways. When you remove that context, you end up with shallow and incomplete narratives. So how might this work in real time with Silva? In the case of virtual reality, as Silva has evoked it here, the erasure of context is a trick that keeps the conversation about emerging technologies on hype. Technologies are going to save us or destroy us, and that's what's positioned as the biggest question in the room. Not what is it actually doing right now, not who is in the room designing stuff, how it's being used now. Siberia or metaverse will give us room to meet each other equally, so there is no reason to wonder why, at the date of this recording, Microsoft fired its entire AI and ethics team just last month. A few weeks ago, on March 28th, an open letter requesting a 6-month moratorium on training AI systems more powerful than ChatGPT was released. The letter was in response to the hype that seized social media, provoking long-standing concerns about a future of automation, mass job loss, instability, machine overlords. The letter asks, should we let machines flood our information channels with propaganda, untruth? Should we automate the jobs, even the fulfilling ones? Should we develop non-human minds that might eventually outnumber, outsmart, obsolete, and replace us? Should we risk loss of control for civilization? As of today, the letter has been signed by over 2,000 people, academics, CEOs, venture capitalists, even tech ethicists. But the questions posed here are the same kinds of questions Silva is deeply invested in. They are big, sweeping, grand questions formulated by a royal we and with no discernible meatbags, no discernible context. What about the harm machine learning and AI training is already doing today? In her own open letter, Timnit Gebru, engineer and founder of the Distributed Artificial Intelligence Research Institute, asks readers to consider why harms already underway are not being addressed. Concerns like worker exploitation, massive data theft, the explosion of media generated using AI, which reproduces oppression while endangering our information ecosystem, and the continued concentration of power in the hands of a few. Okay, so question one done, out of the way. Who are we? Minds, information extended out into technology that is also somehow us. But what about question number two? What are we supposed to do with this information? Here's where we get into this troublesome Gnosticism and desire part of this. See, Silva says that there's more to the story. There's something that unites our minds. Human beings long for these encounters with the epic to rub up against the numinous. It's very weird wording, I apologize. I didn't write it. But also, let's go back to a different claim buried in one of the videos from before. The passport for the numinous lies within. Here is where Silva slips beyond the counterculture, beyond weird, beyond the ideas that technologies merely expand the mind and instead re-enchants it. Silva explains that there's a hidden dimension to technology, and he turns to Eric Davis to explain. Eric Davis is an American journalist and scholar of techno-paganism coming out of Rice University. His most influential book to date, and the one Silva cites the most, is 1998's Technosis, Myth, Magic, and Mysticism in the Age of Information. In it, Davis uses William James and McLuhan to argue that there is an essential spiritual drive for meaning that fosters all religious expression across time and space, and that it is a drive uniquely fostered by technology, and that this is because religious meaning is essentially Gnostic. Gnostic here, meaning a spirituality which crucially depends upon knowledge. My sincere apologies to any Gnostic scholars listening, just close your ears. Davis, citing Valentinus, claims that what liberates us is the knowledge of who we were, what we became, where we are, whereunto we have been thrown, where to we speed. Going on to argue that gnosis comes in the form of information, a sudden blast of immediate data, which is identical with the abrupt recognition that such information exists. And finally, gnosis is not just mystical transcendence, it is data. For Davis, the search for saving knowledge perfectly mirrors an abstracted world of data flows, in which access to information is paramount and life-changing. The internet and information technology, Davis writes, has made communication increasingly intimate, immediate, and omnipresent. Data is shared in the backgrounds of our lives as, for example, our phones share our locations, contacts, activities to corporations that further disseminate our identities and data. In this formulation, information wants because it is an expression of innate spiritual drive. Its evolution is our own. We are long past the materialism of McLuhan or even the actor network theories of Latour, which advocate for an understanding of technology and other objects as things which help construct and shape our world and our imaginations of what is possible. Things that slip our control, but only because full control is always an illusion. These are theories that ask us to take a second look at the kinds of worlds we are making when we invest in different kinds of technologies. When we have cultures, as Langdon Winter argues, that are organized around atom bombs rather than libraries. The idea is that if we can see a little bit better how we are shaping the world, we might take a little more accountability in it. But that's not what Silva's doing. Here, the intertwined construction of worlds becomes something more sinister. Here's Silva taking Davis to his natural, product-ready conclusion. We're thinking through our iPhones and Samsung phones. And because we are coupled to these tools, and because these tools promise to be conduits to transcending our biological limitations, perhaps we should be sympathetic to the reason that we run in droves to buy the new smartphone when it comes out. We're literally getting a mind upgrade. In other words, if religion, capital R, a centralized, frozen out of history, context, and power, if religion is a natural, universal, internal drive for Gnostic meaning, and technology is that drive's natural and inevitable ally, well, then we can no more be responsible for our creations than we can for the rising and the setting of the sun. It preserves the act of technological innovation from critique and amplifies the hype machine. It's no longer about who we are formulated as subjects that grow weary under surveillance or manic in the onslaught of social media. It instead is an act of marketing. Technology offers the promise of progress and transcendence over the body and all that ills us, leading to an uncritical approach to consumption, distracting with utopias, it will solve everything, or dystopias, all jobs will end, and therefore never has to address the now. Which leads to the third question. If we are information minds with a technostic drive, what are we supposed to do about it? Well, clearly the answer is buying things. But it's not just crass commercialism and acquisition. I mean, yes, of course it is that, but it's also investment. It's also building fast and breaking things. It's also being a little shy about regulation and instead doing whatever is possible to foster rapid innovation. Let me show you what I mean. And what is the Internet of Things? Silva says the world is going to become intelligent and responsive and going to anticipate our needs. It's going to feel like an extension of our mindedness. You're going to walk into a room and the room will know how you like the lighting. The song that you love will play. The curtains will rise. The computer will offer you your favorite snack. The entire world will have mind in it. Okay, that's the dream. And that's the hype promise. What's the reality? Well, the Internet of Things is a broad network of physical devices and software that gather, process, and communicate data in real time. It includes everything from toasters to Alexa devices to sensors buried deep in mines or out on oil rigs. These can be tremendously helpful devices, taking seismographic data, for instance, without risking human life. Digital assistants like Alexa can help children with communication and learning disabilities like autism by patiently answering the same questions, reading the same books, setting up gentle reminders for the same routines, and providing a generally low-risk method of safe engagement for these children. They are also the fabric of a new era of global surveillance. They are also at the heart of a new trend in domestic violence, turning smart homes into digital cages. They can blast music, lock someone inside, cut off access to their external world, make them extremely and unsafely hot or cold, speed up or slow down their car, leak their personal information, take illicit pictures, share them to their work, and on and on. But hear all of that context, all of that detail that illustrates how exactly we are building our world with these devices, and what kind of effect they are in return having on the infrastructure of our lives. All of it is lost to a simple set of claims. We are our minds, which is also information, extended onto technologies, answering our deep Gnostic mystical drives, seeking and doing a spiritual transformation. At the same time, we do a digital one. Silva's video ends, sponsored by Norton Security. I had been thinking about the Internet of Things and Silva's video when I read about Piepsna Sermensa's joy in her essay about discovering a library of things. Her local library of things was just down the road, she writes. It's a community-focused, open-access, free network of rental items, ranging from fishing tackle and boxes, to musical instruments, to adaptive Xbox controllers, and even augmentative and alternative communication devices for non-speaking people. But the thing that got me about the Library of Things wasn't that I felt compelled to compare it to the Internet of Things. What got me was what she said next about access and what kinds of information is available to the disability community, what information wants when it comes to disabled lives. She writes, I'm blinking back tears. The library is so beautiful, and I'm 46 years old, and this is the first time I've seen anything like it. It's so much easier to find information about right to die legislation, pushing euthanasia for disabled people, than an adaptive device library that might help make your life rock. Information wants to be free, Stuart Brand once said. But information doesn't want to be free, people do. So by way of conclusion, I want to tell you a story about April 2018. I sat in the back of a crowded auditorium in the heart of San Francisco. I'd been working in tech at Red Hat, an open source software company, for about 6 months, writing my dissertation, trying to navigate the two worlds of academia and corporate life at the same time. Side note, I've come to think that they aren't really as different as everyone pretends. I was one of 7,000 people, engineers, programmers, executives, marketers, who sat watching Ellie Galloway, an elementary school age girl, live coding a piece of plastic jewelry from the center stage. Live coding's no joke. It invites technological failure. Presenters must have nerves of steel and the charisma to cover dead time on stage. Ellie typed on a laptop encased in a plastic cover with rainbow stickers, her voice wobbling as she explained each piece of her code. At one point, she choked, froze. We sat in tense silence, collectively willing her to get through. And then when it worked, there was not one person who wasn't on their feet celebrating. But behind her, the whole time, were the words, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Look, marketing and marketers are early scholars and practitioners of affect. It's what they do and what they seek to cultivate. In the moment that girl succeeded on stage, you'd have to have been heartless not to have had some experience of joy and celebration. But it's also effective because the marketing here, consciously or not, is tugging on a string, a little running assemblage about tech and enchantment that is primed to do this exact thing. Provide an open invitation to the audience to participate in feelings of awe and wonder. It's also a trick. Will we feel joy and get caught up in the hype? The part where this is about a little girl's a chimera. We do not remember that this is brave because girls and women have been erased from the history of computing. That when women were programmers, the role was often described as rote, repetitive, secretarial. But when men came home from World War II and took the jobs back, The same ads describing the same work suddenly describe it as difficult, requiring mastery, skill, mathematical problem solving. Part of the enchantment is that we are proud she overcame without remembering what it actually was that she overcame. To go back to T.L. Lewis, it removes the context, makes social stories about structure and power, personal ones about failure and victory. Silver presents a formulation of information wants that is ethereal and enchanted. The information technologies are only possible because of a global network of machines, markets, and matter that must be produced, sold, and maintained. The conditions of possibility that underlie his ideology is deeply material. Upgrading your mind with the newest digital technology relies on global sweatshop labor, mineral mining, heavy metal pollution, and a class system that means only some will be able to afford spiritual fulfillment. Look, I actually do believe we create new worlds with new technologies that are things, order and solidify and extend power that structures our lives as much as we structure those things. I also believe that technology is tricky, that it slips control, but only in as much as all systems slip control, as total control and power is an illusion. This is the real magic trick in all of this, the obfuscation of how to understand and carve out room for accountability within ambiguity. The focus on the meatbags mask who is being erased now in service of a future built for who. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Schorey. So, we have some time left. So if there's any questions from the audience, I'll just remind you to put them in the Q&A. You should have a little button down at the bottom there, so you can add them in there. I'll start things off if you don't mind. The idea of technology as gnosis is still has my head spinning there. But the affiliation that you seem to be drawing there between kind of broadly speaking kind of religion and technology, like how far back does that kind of go? I mean, are these guys who are drawing these, like, are they aware of kind of the longer history of these associations, or are they doing kind of a very common maybe tech bro thing and thinking they're inventing it themselves?
That's a great question. That's a great question. I think it's a little bit of both. I think that tech culture, probably even more than other sorts of industry, is very invested in lone male genius. And I think that, there's just a lot of ability to pull on rhetorics of magic, enchantment, and wizardry there. I also think that a lot of the people I work with in my job at work as a marketer for tech, I work with a lot of engineers who actually read a ton of philosophy, and when they get to work, that's the stuff that they want to talk about. And they kind of know that the technology slips their control. And they kind of know that, like, it also has an impact back on their life. And so that one of the points I was trying to make was that I think that there is kind of this cultural rhetoric that has been around for a long time. I think especially since the, I mean, for me, the counterculture, but it goes back with each technological invention, right? Like people trying to account for it. Does that kind of answer? Like, I think it is like a running assemblage of easy resources, and then also a bunch of people who are smart, who are sitting down and they're making a thing, and they're kind of faced with how it escapes them.
Yeah, and I'm curious too. I mean, like kind of a follow up on that, if you don't mind, is that so do they have, like, are there outlets for these types of things, or is the outlet kind of the public pronouncement? Like, so you said, like, and not to focus on the kind of the people that you were specifically talking about that you were working about, but if they are having these thoughts, which are, I think, important kind of, interesting thoughts about, like, what is the impact of our technology? How does this work kind of with cognition of mind? And, this idea of enchantment, like, how does that work? Like, those are interesting thoughts. Like, are they talking to each other, or are they kind of just kind of pushing these ideas out with a certainty? Like, and is there a way that could be kind of mediated in some way?
That's a good question. It's hard because I do think it kind of depends on who we're talking about, right? Like like, for example, the Red Hat Summit slide that I had, that's a marketing team. I know those folks. I don't think that they like know this history that I'm talking about. I don't think they meant anything explicit by it, but it was an easy pull. I do think that a lot of engineers that I've met with and a lot of marketers too, like they want to talk to each other. They want to kind of know what impact they're having. Everybody wants to feel good about their job, I think. But it's also at the end of the day selling a product, and I think that that's kind of where it gets tricky because you're representing a company, so it's just an easy set of resources.
Yeah. So do you think, I mean, like, this is a terrible question perhaps, but like, are you hopeful for the direction that things are moving, or is it just kind of a contextual, like some things are going to be bad, some things are going to be good, which is probably the better answer, but.
I think that like what interests me about this topic is I'm hopeful that if we make the questions smaller, we can make more progress. I think that's where we're in that, right? Like the chat GPT thing is a good example. It's like I've wondered if it's going to take my job. People wonder if it's going to take their job. I know in university systems, people are wondering about student papers being written by ChatGPT, all this sort of stuff. But I think like asking those questions along with how much water is ChatGPT taking up, and like, can we actually do that right now? Should we do that right now? It's just kind of extending out the conversation from just this sort of high-pitched mental screaming about the technology that I think is helpful.
Great, thank you. All right, so if anybody has any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A. Otherwise, I will continue to just pester Dr. Schorey. All right, we have one from Dr. Patel in the Department of Religion and Culture. She was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how the appeal to enchantment works to unmoor technology from its context. How does it kind of make it break free from those?
Yeah, I think it's kind of at least how I've seen it, I think it kind of really works in almost that Feuerbachtian way where it just makes it mystical and it gives it agency in a way that takes it from everything else, right? So it gives it a sort of appeal that makes people interested in backing it and buying it, and also infuses it with some sort of agency that I think robs the agency from everybody else. So,
kind of following up on that, if I could too, is that the other thing that's again going back to the gnosis thing that's still kind of breaking my brain a little bit is that like for Silva, like is there what's behind that? Like, I mean, the idea of gnosis, right, is that there's this a divine intelligence like somewhere at the end of whatever that regression is. Like, does he think that's embedded in a microchip? Like how does this work?
Okay, so I think I get your question a little bit more now. So Davis, the guy who wrote Technosis, he was very inspired by like this idea that matter helps form who we are, and he like went back through the history of communication and started like assigning like spiritual evolutions, right? So I think in a certain way it is kind of this messy, like, yeah, we can be in that microchip, like we are cyborgs already. One of the things that really irritates me about these conversations is, nobody ever talks about IUDs as being like cyborgs, right? Right. So it's also like microchips are these cool things mined out of, cobalt mines and owned. They're just very flashy technologies. So I do think it's interesting. Davis very much did go back through and like started out with ancient religion and was like, here's this technology, here's this technology, this technology, this technology. And you can now explain religions by whatever technology they had. Silva, I wish I would have played a video. I didn't feel like I had the charisma in case it froze. But Silva is an interesting character because he's very almost Silicon Valley girl. Like he's excited and he's animated, and I think he is into transhumanism and does think we are information. And I don't know that he has thought about it quite I have not seen anything that goes much further than those.
So it's not a fully developed
No,
theology, if you will.
not for them. You know, like what's interesting about like the copymism folks, the hackers that I mentioned who had created a religion, you know,
Mm.
they've made some pretty compelling arguments about like uh text pieces from the Bible, and you know, Jesus said, copy me, and like, well, literally copying me now. So I do think there can be some robust theologies.
But it just hasn't, not from certain elements.
Not from
Yeah.
stuff. Got 2 minutes in front of Google. You know.
Excellent. So, okay. Any other questions from the audience here? So, I mean, I think this has been, you know, a really interesting and provocative take. I mean, I think I really liked what you kind of said, you know, kind of tying it into questions of disability and kind of, it seemed to me that there was something hopeful there, that there was actually something that could be made out of this, but it's just the kind of blinkered, you know, response to some of these ideas that seems to be holding people back at this moment. So.
Yeah, you know, so the surveillance studies folks, I had started reading surveillance studies folks a few years ago, and in the introduction to the feminist surveillance studies like, big book, it says there are 2 things that the world is facing right now: surveillance capital and global warming. It's like, well, the joke is one will solve the other, right? Like, you're worried about one of those things. And what's really nice about disability justice in particular is that they kind of don't even have patience for the big down the road questions because their fight is so local. So, you know, one of the things she says is like, what are the tactics at the back of the march? Like at the back, the slow end of the march, how are we pulling people along? Like, what are we doing today? And I do think that that's an interesting perspective that is easily lost. And a hopeful, like a radically hopeful one. So those 2 headshots are their headshots. So Leah Lakshmi Pepsna, she's on her side, she's laying down. She's like, I wrote this book laying down. Like, you know, I have COVID. So just those little actions you can do.
Yeah. The realities as opposed to a meatbag, an actual human being. So.
Yeah.
We do have another question from the audience. Let's see. Kirsten Dean says, as a librarian, I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about the role of access and how a library of things contrasts with an internet of things.
Yeah. So thank you so much for that question. It absolutely was one that I was kind of expecting to think about, and then I got thrown by that comment about just access to information. I think a lot of the easy arguments to be made are there that the Internet of Things promises so hard to make our life better, and it's extremely expensive. It's usually finicky. It's capturing all sorts of data, and that data is really, you know, controlling our lives in a very specific way. And to contrast that with kind of a reinvestment in libraries. Reinvestment in tools. I mean, one of the things that I said to Dr. Matthew Gabriel early in the semester was it's really easy to get caught up in the activism behind information wants until you hit a paywall, right? And I experienced that after I got out of the university library access. I was like, okay, actually, we're defunding all these things. And I think that kind of is the same thing here, that there's this rhetoric of everything technology can do as long as it's connected, but there is still a real investment in keeping that under control. Those are kind of my initial thoughts.
Yeah, boundaries on things. So,
yeah.
So, okay. Okay. Well, we'll just do a last call for any questions from the audience. I mean, we've almost taken up the full hour already, so. But let me just take this moment to thank you again for really interesting and provocative talk. I mean, I think it's pushed us in some really interesting directions. Very appropriate too. There was an announcement just today at Virginia Tech about a new institute for I think it's called like technology and leadership, but trying to integrate the humanities and specifically, I think kind of very much outward facing for people already in, the tech industry, and kind of bringing them and integrating the kind of the humanities work and how that can improve the products that they're making. But still, this question of marketing always kind of behind it. So
I think that there is a real audience for that, though. Like, I think that if people felt more empowered to be able to navigate those situations with materials that they have, that they would. So like, I'm really glad to hear that, because I think that that is kind of the next. There's a hunger for it. We have a David Graeber reading group with engineering. Like, they want this.
David Graeber reading group. All right, you've left us on a very hopeful note. I think we need to end there before I kind of ruin it. So yeah. Anyway, thank you again, Dr. Schorey, for a really wonderful talk. Thank you all for spending some time with us this evening. And we hope to see you. We hope to have some more of these events coming up in the fall. Until then, though, take good care, be safe, and we'll hopefully see you soon.
Thank you so much.
Bye.